Why atheist rebuttals fail. Christian apologists, such as myself, have three main arguments for the existence of God and many secondary arguments. All of these together I like to call 3 plus. The 3 stands for the primary arguments and the plus stands for the secondary arguments. Thoughtful atheists have responses to all of the arguments making up 3 plus. In the interest of time, I'll only address the 3 and not the plus in this series of YouTube videos. The 3 main theistic proofs are the cosmological, ontological, and teleological arguments for the existence of God. It is important to note that even if atheistic critiques of these 3 arguments are successful, that by itself does not prove atheism. More generally, an unsound argument for X, whatever X may be, is not a sound argument for not X. A bad argument for something is not a good argument against the negation of that something. That is a basic rule of logic. So if a Christian makes a bad argument for God, the atheist does not disprove the existence of God by debunking the Christian's argument for him, that is, for God. So I'll take these 3 arguments in turn and look at what the atheist says against them and show why what the atheists are saying is not a compelling defeater of the argument. So we have good reason to believe in God as theists, as Christians, but when we are dialoguing with atheists, they will say, well, give us proof for God. We give them proof, and then they say, well, that proof's not good, it's defective in one way or another. And what I'm going to do now, I talk a lot about the arguments in some of my previous videos, but the ontological argument and so on, but I've never really sat down and gone step by step, point by point through what the atheist finds wrong with these arguments and shown why they are in error when they do that. And again, as with all my videos, your disagreements and responses are very welcome. Excuse me, especially if you are yourself an atheist or if you disagree with the soundness of one or more of these arguments. Alright, so first we're going to look at the ontological argument. Ontological arguments are used by Christians and other theists when they argue from the definition of the word God to his existence. In practice, many people who reject the ontological argument do so seemingly not because they have rational grounds for rejecting it, but because they have an intuitive distrust of it. They feel that it must somehow be unsound. It couldn't be that easy to prove God exists, especially since no appeal to empirical data is necessary when we are talking about the ontological argument. Everyone just knows that God can't be proven in a mathematics-like way, or perhaps the ontological argument is just empty word games, sleight of rhetoric, if you will. But these are not serious objections to a formal logical argument. So we want to look at the serious objections. Nowadays, the ontological argument is normally reformulated in terms of modal logic. And the only controversial premise of the newer ontological argument, or the modal ontological argument, is that it is possible that a necessary being exists. So if it is possible that there is a necessary being, then the modal ontological argument is sound, and it does prove validly and soundly that there is a God. So if you want to reject this argument, you have to reject the possibility of a necessary being. Now, what serious objections have been raised to this claim that a necessary being is possible? A necessary being is at least possibly impossible. So that's the first point, point number A, or point letter A. A necessary being is at least possibly impossible. Now, some people think that the idea of a necessary being is incoherent. But if they are right, then the concept of God must be logically contradictory. Is the concept of God logically contradictory? There are several problems with an affirmative answer to that question. First, if a particular definition of God is logically contradictory, then the theist may simply redefine what they mean by the term so that it is no longer contradictory. For example, if omniscience and omnipotence are not compatible, then perhaps God is only omnipotent but not omniscient, or omniscient but not omnipotent. But it is not the coherence of the word God which is in question here, but the coherence of the concept of a necessary being. That is what is in question. Is there such a thing as a necessary being? Is that a possible idea? Is that a logically consistent idea? And that brings up my second objection. A necessary being is, by definition, a being which exists in all logically possible worlds. And I, for one, have no problem imagining such a being. Whether that being exists or not in our world is another question, but I can imagine a being that exists in every logically possible world. And if I can imagine a necessary being, then the concept is definitely coherent. Moreover, why would modal logicians talk about necessity in the first place unless it were a rationally acceptable concept? Finally, the claim that a necessary being is definitely impossible is a fairly radical claim, and most religious skeptics wouldn't be that radical. A skeptic, by definition, doesn't normally like to make such confident claims. But what about the more weak claim that there may be some perhaps yet undiscovered contradiction in the idea of a necessary being? Well, as best as we can tell so far, there is no contradiction. And that's enough to make the modal ontological argument more plausible than not, and so in that sense it is still a good argument for God's existence, even if we might possibly someday discover a problem. We don't know of any problems at the present. Second of all, it is normally not wise to base one's beliefs, or in this case disbeliefs, on arguments based on premises that one hopes shall someday in the future be justified. The atheist may have a valid point to make once they discover a contradiction in the concept of a necessary being, but they have not as of yet discovered such a contradiction. Third, we know that necessary beings are possible. The number 3, for example, is a necessary being of sorts. So necessary being, qua necessary being, is definitely not an impossible idea. And the next objection, B, the possibility of a necessary being is, says the atheist, analogous to the possibility of an unnecessary being. So that is, we'll have to leave that, our examination of that criticism for the next video in the series. But an atheist would say this, or somebody who denies that the modal ontological argument is sound. Alright, so that's where we'll pick up with video number 2. Thanks for watching. Shalom out.